Well, hello there, YouTube. I'm sorry it's been a while, almost a couple weeks since I dropped the video, and time has just been flying by and super crazy. But I'm back. This is Noob DM Ariel, and today I wanted to continue a video series I started in regards to some of the best mechanics or some of the game mechanics that you can incorporate into your fifth edition campaign. I'm talking about game mechanics from previous editions of Dungeons and Dragons, such as first edition or third or fourth edition. Last time, I think I was discussing the skill challenges, which was a feature that was pretty prominent in fourth edition of the game, and skill challenges rather um, had to do with non-combat activities in D&D, and primarily they were, as they said, fourth edition. Now I'm kind of cheating a little bit here because I am using. I'm going to discuss some game mechanics that can be found in the Dungeon Crawl classics, and I just realized that I have the wrong background. Okay, actually, no. This is the correct background. This is the website that I wanted to highlight. Goodman Games, and if you're not familiar with Dungeon Crawl Classics or Goodman Games, basically they're a publisher in the OSR, what they call the OSR movement or original RPG original. I don't know what OSR stands for. I can't remember off the top of my head. So basically the old school, that's what it is, old school resources or old school RPG, old school RPG. And Dungeon Crawl Classics, it's basically a game that's sort of based on the old school dungeons and some of the old school Dungeons and Dragons mechanics. And so like I said, I'm kind of cheating here because it's not technically an older edition, but it might as well be because they incorporate a lot of the flavor, a lot of the mechanics, a lot of the some of the rules that people have been playing, that people that play Dungeons and Dragons and other RPGs have been using since the beginning, since way back in the first edition and beyond. Now, I did go ahead and make a blog post about this in my Gamer Nexus blog, and I'm going to put a link in the description to this video to that if you're interested in reading it. But basically, I was talking in that blog. I was talking about how uh, I had started this series about game mechanics for previous editions over at on this YouTube channel, and how those could be incorporated into any homebrew campaign. Now, here's my copy of Dungeon Crawl Classics. This is actually the something like kind of like a rule book that I got from in 2019 for the free RPG game. I'm sorry, free RPG day. And if you're not familiar with that, there's it's sort of similar to the free comic book day where you go to the hobby store or a game store and they have different products that the publishers make available so that you can buy them. And I like the Dungeon Crawl Classic so much that I did go ahead and buy this rule book. It's a thick rule book. Look at this monster thing. It's like what, over 470 pages of rules and illustration, but it's a fantastic resource for the money. I think it was like 20 bucks, something like that, 25 bucks. But it is so worth it to actually pick that up because it expands on some of those rules. And Dungeon Crawl Classics is published, as I said, by Goodman Games. This is their website, and you can participate in their community. Now, I'm not paid to advertise Goodman Games. I want to get that off the bat. I believe in their product. Even though I haven't run a campaign using the Dungeon Crawl Classics rule set, I totally would, because I have read through it and it's a great system, I think, and it's pretty fun. It looks like it's a pretty fun thing. They do have online games, and you can check out goodmangames.com if you're interested. But since we're talking about specifically the Dungeon Crawl Classics RPG, some of the rules in this game, in this game system, I think would be really fun to incorporate into 5th edition. For example, there's a thing called occupations. Even though 5th edition does have a great background rule that talks about backgrounds. You could make backgrounds and you could add skills through the background system of fifth edition for your characters. I think that it can be enhanced by rolling for occupations like level 0 characters. In Dungeon Crawl Classics, you start off with level 0 characters, and what happens is they go through a funnel. You start off with a group of level 0 characters, and even before you go on your first adventure, even before you come to level 1, you go through like a funnel system, kind of like a testing area, testing adventure, and if they make it out alive, then you can graduate to the first level. That's kind of the idea, you know. But level 0 characters in Dungeon Crawl Classics in this game have something where that's called an occupation, and what happens is the player characters roll on an occupation table where you can roll percentile dice, and then you assign an occupation, and all the occupations range from you can be an alchemist, it could be like a woodcutter. That's just to name a couple. And I think it's a pretty great system because it enhances your role playing right off the bat. So you can have an occupation that you assign to your characters. Like I said, fifth edition does have backgrounds, so the backgrounds kind of playing to the same idea. But I think that just randomly, but they're assigned basically. So you can choose like one, or when you choose your race and your class, then you choose that kind of dictates what your occupation would have. Whereas in this game system, Dungeon Crawl Classics, it's all random. You just roll on a table, and I think that makes it more fun, in my opinion. I'm not. Another thing is, I'm not really crazy about the skills and weapons or item proficiencies as they're described in the fifth edition player's handbook, especially when we're talking about skills with weapons. And on page 7 of this rule book, the light Dungeon Crawls, the very basic rule book for Dungeon Crawl Classics, they present a great system for training weapons. Generally, though, using a weapon without training imposes an attack penalty in this game. I can't really remember if 5th edition has the same feature among all the rules, but if it does not, then you definitely, as a DM, can incorporate this weapon skills or skills with weapons. It sort of, for me, kind of harkens back to 2nd edition, where we had something mechanics about they didn't call them skills, and I talked about this in previous videos, but in 2nd edition we had weapons proficiency, so your character could be, depending on your class or your race and class combination, your character could be proficient with a longsword. If you were playing an elf or a ranger, you could be proficient with a broadsword, with a short bow rather, and so you didn't take any penalties with it, because any character could actually use any weapons, but it makes sense that if you're not proficient with it, if you're not training, you're not trained in it, then you would have some kind of penalty because the concept is you're not as proficient with the weapon. And this carried over from Dungeons and Dragons to I'm thinking of like MMOs and something like World of Warcraft, where you definitely have to become proficient with the weapons that you use. Your character can't even use a weapon or they can use it. Sometimes they can't use it, depends on the level, but most of the time, even if they can use it, and if they're not proficient, they'll take some kind of penalty. Another thing I like from this system is something that DMs already know about and have been using, I'm sure, in their game systems. But DCC, Dungeon Crawl Classics, does codify a system for fumbles, rolling fumbles. So because one thing that really irritates me about 5th edition is that the characters can be really powerful, and I've mentioned this time and time again. Even at the early levels, and like they can go through an adventure or a dungeon or something, and even at early level, they take some damage, but nothing catastrophic really seems to happen to them. And even if it does, they just solve it really easily, or it can be overcome by taking a long rest. In fact, I was in a game yesterday with my group, 5th edition game, and one of the characters died. The guy was kind of playing, kind of not really being careful, and he went ahead and killed his character, or his character died, took a lot of damage from a fall. And, some people took damage, but some of the players were kidding around and saying, well, all you have to do is take a long rest, and then you'll get all your spells back. Because I was playing a cleric, spellcaster, and I had expanded some spell slots. And I was like, well, how many spells do I get back on a long rest versus short rest? I think we're getting a long rest, and I think this concept, I could be mistaken, but the concept of long rest dates back to at least fourth edition, where they introduced like healing surges, and I think that was the beginning of making the characters powerful. One thing I really liked about uh, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons second editions was that the spellcasters had spells which wouldn't go off every time. In fifth edition, a spell can fail if the caster loses concentration, but otherwise the spell works almost every time. Nothing bad happens. So when you introduce the fumbles and fumble charts, I think it's not a new mechanic, of course, but DCC brought it back, which a rule that with the rule that states that a natural one is a fumble and something always bad happens after the player character rolls a natural one. The penalties range from a wild miss with your weapon to becoming off balance, causing them to take a penalty on their next attack, on the next attack roll, to somehow managing to wound themselves. They can wound themselves or take damage. And I think that's a great mechanic that should be. I like it. I know some DMs don't like it because they feel that it just. I've heard people say that it discourages people when they're taking damage, or they fumble, and it's not their fault that they roll a one. But that's part of the game. It's just a lot of chance, and then you take a chance. Something bad should happen from time to time, because I don't think that it's realistic for your weapons not to break. In real life, your weapons would degrade over time. They're not perfect. Nothing is, unless they're made of some magical material that doesn't degrade over time. But even that, there's some limitations to that, or should be some limitations to that. So I think it's a great system. Again, the MMOs carried, or the video game online, persistent online worlds such as World of Warcraft, they carried this idea into the game. So, sometimes you're battling around and I think it usually happens after your character dies and you come back to life. If you do that enough times, or even just over time, your weapon and your equipment will start to degrade. So you have to go and find a repair person and they repair it for you. It's really not it's really more of a hassle, because then you have to go into town or to go into an area where you can find a repairman or a repair person, at repair NPC. But for the most part, I think it's a good mechanic. Something bad happens when you roll a nat one. The other thing is spell burns. This is unique to this game. I don't think I've seen it in other RPGs, but basically, since we're talking about spellcasters, another great mechanic is a spell burn. So a magic user, which is what we used to call them back in the day, we didn't call them like wizards or warlocks, but we called them a magic user. Magic user, if you were a cleric, if you were a priest, they can harness more magical energies if the caster is willing to make a mortal sacrifice. So they can go up to an NPC or like a god or like a deity and ask if they could make a sacrifice, including offering parts of their own body or soul to a demon, sacrificing his or her own personal strength to foster a demigod's growth, or as the basic book states on page, I think it's 25. Let me just check real quick. Page 25, the book says, even by burning the very life energy of your own self. So the character can burn life in order to get a desired result. And finally, the last mechanic on the spellcasting side of things is corruption. Corruption, I think, is a great idea, and I don't know if there's something similar already in 5th edition, but if there isn't, you can incorporate it into your campaign if you're a DM, or if you're running a game with homebrew mechanics. In DCC, continual use of magic results in changes. It says changes. The book states exposure to demons, radiation from other planes, elemental energies in toxic quantities, and the servants of chaos all affect the wizard over the course of his or her career. This makes total sense to me, because to incorporate this idea into the game of corruption makes a lot of sense to me, because it it's just logical that if you're casting spells, you're gonna have to take a toll. It's just not like you can memorize spells and you cast different spells, but some spells are divine, some spells are arcane, and depending on the source, sometimes you can be harnessing it from a deity or harnessing it from another source, and it would make sense that some corruption would happen, over time. Um, the book talks about how there's a table that you can roll on, which is really great. So you roll on the table, and depending on your result, the die result, it gives you some consequences, including the PCs can develop horrible pustules on their faces, or you get the chills, or something along those lines happens. And as you progress and you have higher level spells or more difficult, more intricate type of spells, then the corruption could be like more catastrophic, so something even worse could happen. I think this is a really good way to mitigate the fact that in fifth edition, spellcasters can become incredibly OP, even in the lower levels. So that's one mechanic that you can incorporate, and you can are able to make sure or to take care of that. So anyhow, those are some of the mechanics that I talk about in the blog. I'll think of some more if I can think of as I go through the earlier editions. But I just think that they incorporating these into your game and into your campaigns will definitely enhance your experience. So that's all I have for you guys now. Thank you for tuning in again to the channel. I do have a Patreon set up, and there's a link if you want to go ahead and support the channel. You're not required to, but it's always appreciated to help bring more videos to light like this. And if you like this type of content, don't forget to hit the like button or subscribe or subscribe. Like or subscribe, and I will talk to you guys at a later date.